individual in pursuit of divine or ultimate ground of meaning. And religions express that in different ways. The archetype of this period is the monk. So we have the Hindu sannyasi, we have the Buddhist monk, we have the Jewish prophet, and then we have the Christian monk. But the archetype is the solitary, and it's in a sense what Plotinus said, the flight of the alone to the alone. In our own age, particularly with the 20th century, a new consciousness has ushered in, and largely through technology and mass communication. And we call that, for all practical purposes, a new axial age. We are in a new axial age, a new axial period of consciousness. We have a sense, an awareness of connectivity. I mean, the whole ecological movement grew only within the last 20, 30, well, since the 60s, basically. The sense of religious plurality. I mean, when I was growing up, my next door neighbor was Scottish Protestant. You know, my mother would say, she's Scottish Protestant. I'm like, oh, wow, you know. Today, I mean, we're Hindu and Protestant and Catholic and Muslim together. So our sense of religious consciousness is shifting. We have, through the internet, we have a global consciousness. You know, we can be in touch with immediate access to all peoples. So the lines of difference are erased by our technological internet world. And that is a plus and a minus for us, because religiously, we are still in the first axial age. We're sort of like the Flintstones, I guess, you know. And culturally, we are in a new axial age. So we live with a little bit cognitive dissonance. This is part of our struggle today. It's sort of a split brain problem. We go to church, you know, however we practice our faith or however what our religious beliefs, they're in this mindset or this paradigm. We step out into the culture and we're in this paradigm. And we cannot seem to bring these worlds together yet. That's where I come in. You know, it is helpful to know where we're coming out of. You know, our history is important to know what has brought us to this moment and then to see how we can go forth. Our theology, whether it's out of Catholic or Protestant traditions, really has a medieval root. And the Middle Ages, you know, that was a great time flourishing with ideas, but they were very influenced by Greek philosophy. I mean, the two great, you know, Greek philosophers were Plato and Aristotle. So from Plato, we get the sense that it's an okay world, but there's a better world out there, you know, out there someplace. So from Plato, we get the sense is everything is sort of an imitation of true reality. And the idea to get to true reality is to withdraw from the world and contemplate the real, you know, the true. And then from Aristotle, we get the sense that, you know, matter, forms determine matter. So we have the language of body and soul belongs more to Aristotle than Plato in our tradition. But it's the Platonic, maybe the Platonic spirituality that has really maybe given us the overall paradigm of God is up there, we are here, and our whole task is to leave here and go there. So the language of there and here. Even when we pray, I mean, when I watch people pray, they're pointing, you know, to there. And I think, well, where's there? You know, what is there? As my mother used to say, you know, because our language of heaven ushered in, you know, and our belief systems, when, you know, the person dies, the body goes into the ground, but the soul goes to God. We have very dualistic language still in our religious tradition. What's a body? What's a soul? Well, we won't get into all that. We only have an hour together, so. All of this to say is we have inherited, and if you look at the way liturgy is structured, it's a hierarchy of being. So in the medieval world, first of all, there's two things you should note about it, two important things. The medieval cosmos, upon which all our theology is based, was a geocentric cosmos. The earth was the center, and the human was the center of the earth. And out of that cosmos are, dear Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure all built their theologies. So that cosmos is static, it's hierarchical, and it's geocentric. And, we had other spiritual writers to say that as we go from earth to heaven, we move up, you might say, the ladder of being. So stones, and plants are a lesser being than humans. Humans are a lesser being than angels. Angels are a lesser being than God. So the idea is you strive up the ladder of ascent towards spiritual perfection, that language of perfection. Even today, we still live with this sense of Father knows best, Well, I don't know how many of you have that, but, we have the ordained here and the sisters here, and then we have, people say, well, I can't be holy, because I'm just a lay person. I'm like, oh, God. We're still in the medieval world of thinking. That type of thinking has really lent itself to a lot of our anti-ecological consciousness. We have been so wired to think towards otherworldliness that our attention has been away from the earth toward another place, toward that place of heaven. And it has been unhelpful. In the late 14th century, with the discovery of telescopes, and particularly among astronomers, they began to realize that the Earth was not the center of the universe. That indeed the Earth seemed to be moving with the other planets around the sun. So, at that point, heliocentrism emerged as the model of the universe. And that, to me, is one of the roots of our problems today. Forget evolution. We have still yet to come to grips with the heliocentric universe. And, the basic problem is one, not of the sun being center. The key word is change. And the church resisted heliocentrism. Look what it did to Galileo, placed him under house arrest for the rest of his life. It was, what will we do with scriptures if the earth is moving? How are we going to interpret things? So the whole thing was, we're going to not deal with this. We're going to stick with what we have from Thomas. We're not going to deal with this. So what we see, now what's interesting at this time, up to the Middle Ages, you see a congruent relationship between the human person and the cosmos. The microcosm and macrocosm fit nicely together. So many of the writings, that's why I think it's very attractive to us, the writings of the mystics of this period, Hildegard of Bingen, or the canons of Chartres, because they speak of this harmony of the spheres. That harmony was disrupted when heliocentrism became the acceptable model of the universe. And really what happened, as I see it, as the earth became moving around the sun, the human person we lost our purpose in creation. We had a role to play in the geocentric universe. We were the center, the apple of God's eye, and the whole point of our lives was to bring, the whole and the particular together, heaven and earth. When heliocentrism arose and the earth was spinning, we got demoted to a spinning planet. And that left someone like Descartes very, very neurotic, to say, well, how are we going to, what are we going to do with God in a changing world? How can we come to any certainty of God if we're changing, if everything is changing? So he said, well, we'll just take God out of the cosmos and we'll put him in the self-thinking person. The only thing I can know for certain is I think, and my own thinking leads me to the certainty of God. That has given rise, you might say, from 16th century onwards, individualism. You know, we see that Cartesian breaking up of matter and spirit, body and soul, heaven and earth, and the only way we can make sense of anything is within ourselves. And in that, you know, radical turn to the subject, God became more and more distant. You know, we see God moving out into the transcendence. And God, therefore, becomes sort of like the clockmaker, you know, the judge, the one who's over us. And we see the church retreat from the rise, you know, with the Enlightenment, the rise of modern science. We see it shrinking into doctrine and law. It moves from being sort of a living, organic type of a church to a doctrinal, juridical church. And God becomes the just judge, the law, the orderer. So, you know, Newton's world, and this is where I think we still live today. For all practical purposes, we live in a mechanistic world. Our church is mechanistic, our systems are mechanistic, politics, economics, social. A mechanistic world is a world of parts. So we're all little parts in sort of the machine. And, you know, the church sort of operates like a machine, you know, so the part malfunctions, you replace the part. Sometimes. Would be good if you replaced more parts, but it's okay. Newton's world worked according to law and order. You know, the whole thing of Newton's world is God is the clockmaker. God creates the machine, but then God retires to Florida. And then God checks in the machine every so often and fine-tunes it, and the thing just keeps on humming. So Barbara Taylor Brown wrote that, she said, believing that Newton told us the truth about how the world works, she says, we modeled our institutions on atomistic principles. You are you and I am I. If each of us will do our parts, then the big machine should keep on humming. She says, our God view came to resemble our worldview. In this century, even much of our practical theology has become mechanical and atomistic. Walk into many churches and you'll hear God described as a being who behaves almost as predictably as Newton's universe. Say you believe in God and you will be saved. Sin against God and you will be condemned. Say you are sorry and you will be forgiven. Obey the law and you'll be blessed. And that is really how we still function. You know, God is you know, the big G, and we want to make sure that we're okay, so we want to do good things to get, you know, and we still think like this. We think mechanistically, you know, even religiously. And the fact is, we don't live, really, in that world anymore. We don't live in the medieval cosmos. Geocentrism is over. Thomas Aquinas, bless his soul, may he rest in peace, but he's dead, okay? He did leave us, however, a very insightful saying. And his saying was this: a mistake about creation is a mistake about God. A mistake about creation is a mistake about God. There is no theos without cosmos. And once you start splitting up theos, or God, from the cosmos, you have a mirage. You don't have God. I don't know what you have. You have a thought. And so Thomas, like many others, calls us back to realize that what we know about this creation is revelation. This is what God is. And that leads us then to the world of modern science. Thank God, you know, we do have intellect and the ability to discover, to know, to invent. And that's the beauty of the type of God we're in relationship with. Now, the world in which we live in is not a static geocentric universe. It is for all practical purposes, an evolutionary one. And evolution is the new, if I were to use a word, it's the new meta-narrative. And I think it's important for us to engage what that means for us. It doesn't, you know, in its biological meaning, it's a 17th century word that became prominent in the 19th century with Darwin, although he used it only once in his work. And it has come to prominence in the 20th century as more than just, you know, my cousin is a bonobo, you know, or, you know, I'm related to the whale. It's not just simply the biology of how we got here. It's not only about natural selection or adaptation. Evolution in its broadest meaning means an unfolding or an unrolling. It's a process. And that's the key word for us here. So what we're saying is that the universe is not a mechanism of parts. It is a process of unrolling or unfolding life. And the key aspects of this process are there is lawfulness in nature, certainly, but there's also chance, maybe some spontaneity, and the other aspect is deep time. Deep time. We know that this universe today, our universe, is about 13.7 billion years old. Now that is an incredible span that we can't get our minds around. We can't even get our minds around a million years, but 13.7 billion years old. And, you know, how this universe came into existence is still, you know, it's speculated, many different theories, but we can't say exactly. We call it the Big Bang because there is something of a, that term was sort of coined with a, you know, like a, yeah, right, it's like a Big Bang, you know, by someone who didn't believe in the Big Bang, actually, Fred Hoyle. But it's sort of like, you know, sort of a blip on the screen. And you know, there's all sorts of theories, you know, did it emerge out of a previous universe, sort of an oscillating type thing? There's very little data to support that. Is it, there's the idea of multiple universes, you know, and we just happen to live in this one fit for carbon-based life. So we can't say, what we can say is, and God said, let this universe come into being. And voila, here we are. That's not where science is. But what we call this beginning is a singularity. There's a transition period in which we go, you might say, from quote-unquote nothing into something. And what's amazing about this kind of blip on the screen, this little quantum event, so to speak, it rapidly inflates this universe, and then it cools. You know, it's like, and then starts cooling, and the forces of the universe start to come into play. Now that's just, it's mind-boggling, you know, and it's actually much more dramatic and imaginative than the mechanistic universe. So that tells us a little bit something about God. He's not so boring, or she, you know. A lot of my work these days is with the Jesuit scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And we house his archives at Woodstock Theological Center. And a few years ago, the program manager came into my office with 2 boxes, and he said, you know, these have been sitting in my office for the last 10 years. Would you like them? And I said, well, what are they? He said, they're Teilhard's notes. Yeah, I think I could use these. Can I sell them? No. How many of you maybe know Teilhard? So he's, oh, good. That's great. Yeah. He was a remarkable and insightful thinker. He was a Jesuit scientist, a paleontologist by training, spent many, many years in China, in the deserts of China, associated with the Piltdown hoax, and unfortunately associated with that. But he did a lot of, his area of specialty was the Geocene era, between 54 and 34 million years ago. But he was also a Jesuit. You know, and those of you who know Jesuit, they're very, very big on Ignatian spirituality. And, you know, here's contemplation and action. Teilhard spent many, many years in the desert looking for the origins, to piece together the story of how we emerged, which he did so in his book called The Human Phenomenon. I do think those long periods of reflection, prayerful working with the earth, led him to the original insights that he gave us. And one of the few who have put together evolution and the Christian story in a way that makes sense for where we are and where we need to go in our time. What he basically said is this, evolution is not a theory. It is the way nature works, the way we have emerged. In other words, the process of unfolding life is how we got here. And it is also what we are involved in. Now, let me just say at this point, that understanding of evolution is not where the official Catholic Church is. The official Catholic Church, I know, just in case you're not sure about that, but just want to underline that there are writings to support that they do not support evolution as the way life unfolds. They consider it, the Church considers it a theory among many theories, which means, we could have spontaneously came here and, I had someone visit me a few years ago who thought we were created fully formed and dropped here from heaven. And I thought, wow, yeah, but I do meet lots of different types of people today. But 46% of the American public still does not believe in evolution. Or maybe much larger than 64% or something like that, yeah. Yeah, so there's a large part of in other words, our culture at large who do not accept evolution as the way we're here or what we're about. And this was, Teilhard's greatest, one of his first things is you have to start with evolution. You don't work it in along the way. This is how we get here. So how we get here. We come out of a long process. That's the first thing we're saying. Life takes time. And that's a little bit of our challenge today. We want things to happen immediately. Technology has pushed us into that consciousness. But what we know is that life changes, and life changes take deep time. And so our whole sense of time, I think, needs to be understood with, maybe thanks to Einstein, as part of space and a part of, an expanding space and part of the unfolding. Deep time, if we could look back at this 13.7 billion year old thing and look at that, it took 400,000 years after the Big Bang for light patterns to emerge. Or about 400 million years for the first stars to emerge. That long process of time for things to come together and to unfold. But things do come together. And here is one of the great, I think, mysteries of the universe that Teilhard highlighted. And that is, there seems to be a fundamental law of attraction in the universe. He spoke of evolution as a movement of convergence and divergence. So there's a basic fundamental law of attraction where things come together, center to center, so to speak. They form new entities, or what he called complexification. Complexification really refers to the degree of relatedness. Simple isolated structures let go of their isolated existences and they come together and form a new union that has an enhanced relationality. And that new complexity forms something new, which we call emergence. Emergence refers to new things forming out of previous entities, so to speak. But they're new, they're different from what came before them, but it's because what is before that gives rise to the new. And that's the process itself. Elements unite, union complexifies. Complexifies means new things emerge. And he called that fundamental law of attraction love. So needless to say, this led me to write a new book this summer. And what he, because we have so, in a sense, reduced love to emotion and human sentiment, we have almost depleted love of its cosmological force. And what Teilhard brings us back to, and what he says explicitly, is that love is the physical structure of the universe. Now, that is very interesting in terms of what we know today about the universe in terms of energy. That is primordially energy. And what he's saying is that love is, you might say, that energy of bondedness, that brings things together in a personal, synthetic way for more being. And so he brings us out of the medieval cosmos by saying we are no longer in a static universe. This is a dynamic universe of love energy. That's the term he uses. Love energy that unites, that attracts, unites, and gives rise to more being. And he says the whole process of life is toward more being, more consciousness. And he uses the word not metaphysics from the Greeks. Get rid of that. The word he uses is hyperphysics. The whole structure of the universe, he's saying, is oriented toward more life, more being, more consciousness. The first thing what we have to keep in mind about evolution, it is an incomplete universe. The universe is incomplete. We are incomplete in the universe, which means we are works in progress, which is not how we think religiously. Religiously is, this is it. So we have, religiously is, this is it, it sinned, it fell, needs to be repaired. Evolution says, no, we are works in progress. Nothing is finished. So needless to say, Teilhard did not hold to original sin because there's nothing original about sin. Sin is part of the incompleteness, you might say, of the whole universe. So it's an incomplete universe that what? Rests on the future. And so Teilhard says our sole support rests on the future. And again, instead of thinking up, down, it's thinking inward, forward. It's thinking now, forward. So I think, Teilhard's understanding of love as a cosmological force and that idea of hyperphysics is the beginning of moving away from the classical world of Greek metaphysics. Now, we also have, so we have, Teilhard spoke of 3 different realms of being. He spoke of the infinitely large, the cosmological, the infinitely small, the quantum world, and the infinitely complex, the biological world. So the infinitely large is this incredible universe that we know ourselves to be in on this little mid-sized galaxy of the Milky Way. Just to keep in mind, we are just one of millions of galaxies, collections of stars, and probably many universes. Science can only tell us so much at this point. Only to say is, do we really think we're it? I just want to sober us a little bit that, the Mars exploration and the continuous space explorations, will probably one day reveal some other forms of intelligent life. And we should delight that God is not so boring. God is not, God is not confined just to us, So, but there is this world of the infinitely small, the quantum world. Niels Bohr's statement, if you're not confused or shocked by quantum physics, you have not understood it. He was absolutely right. Really, it is a strange world of interconnectivity where, particles can act like waves and waves can act like particles, and you cannot tell if it's a particle or a wave unless you measure it. And so it's a participatory world. You need to be there. You need to measure things. You can't say something is without being involved in it. So that land of true objectivity, or as the classical world of objectivity, apart from subjectivity, no longer holds in the quantum world. The only way we can say something exists is by observing it. And so, quantum world really rests on probabilities. It could be. There's the probability of something happening, but we can only say something is happening when we actually measure it, when we observe it. Werner Heisenberg's theory of uncertainty. And we don't like uncertainty. We want things certain, And, the principle, which has, its critics among the physicists, but his idea is the more precisely the position of a particle is determined, the less precisely the momentum is known. That anything that's measured has within it a variation of its other factors, like position and velocity, which means there's no truth. You cannot say for certain exactly that something is here and moving this fast at the same time. And that leaves us just a little bit edgy. What do we do with that kind of uncertainty? Well, the good news is it's not a deterministic universe. So we really can't predict future. We can suggest or speculate on future events, but we cannot say exactly this is going to happen. Remember in 2000 when everyone thought the end of the world was coming? Because we were pretty sure 2000, end of millennium, it's going to happen. So everyone's digging, holes in the ground and buying all sorts of food and stocking up for the second coming of Christ. Well, it's 2012, and stores are restocked. So it's not a deterministic universe. The path of reality comes into existence when we are engaged in it. Now, while that is an insight from the quantum world, that has implications for us on the macro world, on the large world level. We need to be there, and that means all aspects of our life. We need to be engaged in the unfolding of reality. We are, therefore, from the quantum physicists tell us, we are actors and actresses rather than spectators. And that, again, is I find different from classical religious thinking, we're just pilgrims and strangers, in a fallen world. So I remember my brother telling me this, I'm just a pilgrim here. I'm just passing through. So that means I'm not going to get involved because I'm just a pilgrim here, or as, what's that theologian from Canada who wrote Life in Abundance? Sally, that's it, Sally McFaig. Thanks, LJ. Yeah, she says, this is our home, and we need to really follow the rules of the home. We're not just passing through here. This is it. This is it. And I think, coming to be at home in this home, and taking, coming to awareness of what this home is about, it's important to us. Teilhard saw that evolution is an unfolding of consciousness. And he says that consciousness is present from the beginning of the Big Bang, right through into the human person. And it's interesting because more and more scientists today are looking at consciousness as not something that just sort of appears in the human person once the human brain emerges, but consciousness and complexity go together. As entities become more complexified in nature, consciousness increases, which is interesting. You have to keep these concepts in mind because they do come into play down the road here. Now, consciousness is, we don't know exactly what it is, but that it is for sure. That awareness, that attentiveness, that is both an outward consciousness, you might say, and a subliminal consciousness. What we find from the world of physics and biology is that consciousness seems to be part of the natural world itself, perhaps pertaining to the fields of energy that, comprise our physical universe. Albert Einstein, for example, he did not like quantum theory. He did not like the unpredictability of quantum reality. And he did this little thought experiment, where he took a particle and split it apart and put half the particle here and half on the moon. He thought about this, he said, well, now, if I turn the particle here, 180 degrees up, what will happen to the particle on the moon? And his two postdocs said, I bet it'll turn 180 degrees down. And sure enough, that's what John Bell, the physicist, later found, is that, things separated by large space fields, can influence each other directly and proportionately. And that's just amazing. And others have shown, like Rupert Sheldrake, from the world of biology, that repeated patterns of behavior can set up informational fields that other people who for example, we know the child's thing of Humpty Dumpty, but the people in Micronesia never heard of Humpty Dumpty. But, we've repeated and told that story over and over, that if someone goes to Micronesia and shows them, the poem or the story, some can tap into it more easily. So morphogenetic fields means people at other places and locales can tap into something more readily because the informational field is set up. A practical example, the computer. When I got the computer in 1991 at Fordham University, my classmates said, my husband works for IBM, we'd like to give you a computer. I said, what's a computer? And they're like, oh, this thing, you just turn it on. So it took us like a year to, my community, to figure out like how to use WordPerfect and all this kind of stuff. So 1991 to 2012, 91 we were still struggling like dinosaurs, with the computer. In 2012, my 2-year-old grandniece opens the computer and, away she'd go. There's a whole level of consciousness that has evolved. An informational field has been set up, that young generations can tap right into it. In fact, young generations are so now wired, I think their brains are just different from us. But what we're saying is that, their consciousness seems to be part and parcel, much more than just what am I thinking. There's a shared energy field, shared energy fields today in the universe. It's the type of idea, you're thinking about someone and you say, gosh, I haven't heard from them in a while. And then all of a sudden you turn your email on, or you get a phone call. It's that idea that there's an energy being shared. So David Bohm, a contemporary of Einstein, called a type of underlying order in the universe an implicate order. There seems to be a hole beneath the whole of what we are. And he called this undivided wholeness in flowing movement. We still think of ourselves as parts. But Bohm said, rather than starting with parts and explaining the whole in terms of parts, why not start with the whole and see how the parts are part of the whole? It's a whole shift in thinking. So the term used today is holon. We are wholes within holes within holes. We are not just parts that are related to one another. Rather, there's a much more integral connectivity amongst who we are. So, the idea of, we're sisters and brothers, as the Franciscans would say, that's just not like a nice idea. From what Bohm is saying, from the physical perspective, that's really true. We are literally, holes within holes. So he says, as humans and societies, we seem separate, but in our roots, we are part of an indivisible whole. In our roots, we are part of an indivisible whole and share in the same cosmic process. Now think about that as you go shopping, in the Giant, in the post office, as you're driving, when you turn your television on and you see what's happening in Iran and Afghanistan and Africa. Are we really part of the same cosmic process? Do we have a consciousness of belonging to the whole and being whole? So, needless to say, I titled my book this summer, The Unbearable Wholeness of Being. But time is short, so I won't go too much into it. What we are saying here, however, is the insights from the natural world today. First of all, we need to take hold of what they are in terms of evolution and quantum physics. And then we must say, well, how do these affect how we think about ourselves, or even how we think, period? Thinking is important to evolving. as Teilhard would say. How we think is how we will go forward or not. We continue to think mechanistically. We continue to think analytically and linearly. And, the world of quantum reality and the world of systems biology is asking us to think in a new way. A systems thinking. That we're not thinking about the part itself, but whatever we think about is part of a whole. So the idea of the context of anything that exists, which, led me to really think about how our educational system today. And quite honestly, how we are educating for an unsustainable future. And I'm part of that system. But, let's just take an honest look at it. A student majors in a discipline, and then within that discipline breaks that discipline down into a specialization, and within that specialization breaks it down to a subspecialization. So it's fragment, fragment, fragment to specialize, specialize, specialize. And we come out with silos of specialization so that in any department, no two people can really have a conversation because you don't speak the same language I do in my specialty. That is just the opposite of where we need to go if we are to go into a future of life. And so just, to put it out there that what we are talking about in terms of evolution and systems thinking is not just, that's a great idea. This is really, we need to engage and we need to move forward. Now, just in terms of evolution, just to underline the fact that if we were to consider evolution as a 30-volume encyclopedia, we always like the Encyclopedia Britannica. So, like volume 1, Big Bang, volume 21, Earth. Well, we humans are volume 30. We're the last volume, the last page on this volume, and the last 2 words of the last line, which is human beings. 2 things. The story's still being written. Just because we're the last 2 words of this volume doesn't mean it's the end of the story. So evolution continues through us. I think we must get our heads around that. We are, as Teilhard said, we are the arrow of evolution. We do have a role to play in this universe. And therefore, our choices and our decisions are fundamental to the future of how this universe will continue to evolve. And that brings me then to really the question of Christ in evolution. Again, as I started out, we have our religious mind here, and we have, the doctrines of Jesus Christ and of God as creator and redemption, resurrection, etc. And then we have an emerging consciousness here through science and culture. And the question is, how do we bridge these 2 worlds together? So the question I ask is, what is the meaning of Jesus Christ in a universe that is still coming to be? And I think, as Teilhard said, we're still dealing with Jesus Christ like, from 500 years ago, as if nothing has changed. And it's losing its core value, he said. The whole meaning of Christ has lost its core value. Very briefly, if we were to ask, why the Incarnation? Why Jesus Christ? You have 2 schools of thought. One comes from Adam and Eve and Macintosh apples. And so here's our story, because we live by stories. So our classical story is, once upon a time, there was a beautiful garden. And in that beautiful garden were 2 beautiful people, and oops, they had free will. And it was that woman, Eve, who was tempted by Satan to eat of the forbidden tree, and she lured Adam. And alas, the whole kit and caboodle fell into disobedience, and therefore, was subject to death. And the only way humanity could be restored to God is if God sent the Son, because only one equal to God could repay that debt due to sin. So that is what we still not only talk about, we celebrate every Easter, right? Oh, Felix culpa. Oh, happy fault. For if Adam had not sinned, Christ would not have come. So, yay for sin, you know. Give me an S, give me an I, give me an N. No. So we have sin. Then we have a whole group of people said, you got to be kidding. You're saying that Christ, you know, that Christ is about sin. That doesn't make sense if God is love. And they said, no. From all eternity, God is love. And from all eternity, love loves to love. And from all eternity, God willed to love a finite other. God willed to share that love with one, you might say, who could respond to God in grace and glory, and therefore the Christ. And so it's known as the primacy of Christ. And all we're saying is, you know, Christ is first in God's intention to love and therefore to create. Now that tradition has been in the church since the 2nd century with Irenaeus of Lyon. The church has never said, oh, no, that's ridiculous. It's been there because it's actually more scriptural than the former, than the first one. But it has not embraced it. And now it is our time to embrace it. And what we're saying is that the whole Big Bang evolution from the beginning is ordained to the Christ. Now, let me just PS here. Language carries weight. I was going to say baggage. It does. And I know when people hear the Christ, I inevitably get, well, how about other world religions? And okay, we need to break open what the Christ means. Okay? We're not saying that, you know, for so long I think Christ has been linked to Jesus as his surname. Like Jesus Christ, like, you know, like the son of Mr. and Mrs. Christ. But it's Jesus is the Christ. And we have so focused on Jesus, we have lost sight of the meaning of the Christ. And yet we call ourselves Christian. Go figure, you know. So Christian has been focused on this really nice man from Nazareth, you know, who went about doing good works. But the whole thing, 13.7 billion years old, you know, is oriented toward the Christ. And what that means in the most simple language, unity in love. Unity in love. Christ is the fullness of divine, human, cosmic unity in love. Personal unity. Unity in love does not mean everyone becomes Catholic or everyone becomes Christian. It means actually just the opposite. It's the rich diversity of personalities in union of love. I think we have shrunk God, you know, as if God might only like this little contingent of Catholics. You look at creation and you look at the rich variety, flowers and trees and leaves. You know, botanists spend years studying all these. And how would we ever think that God would not delight in the rich diversity of persons, but united in love? And so Teilhard spoke of not just the divine human natures of Christ, but the third nature of Christ, the cosmic nature. And he said, we have made Christ too juridical. It's too just all about, you know, this lawfulness of who Jesus is. He says the Christ is the organic, you might say, unfolding of divine love in cosmos, coming to consciousness in the human person. And the term, Teilhard, like Raymond Panikkar, like Paul Tillich, all point to a new God that is emerging in our midst, a new understanding of God. The old Greek God, in a sense, doesn't work anymore. And the new God is actually more Christian. What we're saying is that God is love. So love is not just something God does, that is what God is. So where there's love, there's God, okay? If you just turn that around. And love is relational. Love is not the isolated, self-thinking subject. You know, I think I'll stay home and love today. You know? Love is not a thought. Love is not an idea. No love without real expression, without real embodiment. And therefore, when we say God is love, we're saying that love poured out into otherness is the revelation of God. And therefore, that love poured out, creation, is incarnation all along the way. So every star, every leaf, every tree, every rabbit, every worm, every person is love poured into otherness. And that is the Christ coming to be. So Teilhard spoke of this as Christogenesis, the birthing of Christ. It's evolution. It's a process. So the Christ is not something, the Christ, we are Christians. It's the Christianizing, the Christification of the universe. It's a birthing of love incarnate all along the way. So that, even Meister Eckhart, that wonderful Dominican mystic that LJ mentioned, he says at one point, the essence of God is birthing. The essence of God is birthing. We have made God's this static male figure, overarching us. When God is that fullness of love poured out, in us, in all of creation, and therefore God is not over us. We, in a sense, are the privileged bearers of transcendence. It is, you might say, what I think underlies the whole eros of the cosmos itself, the yearning, St. Paul says, for that completion. In Romans 8, Paul speaks about the Spirit groaning and the whole creation groaning aloud, for its fulfillment. It's that God seeks to become God at the heart of this universe. We have made, this idea that God's here and we're here, and all we do is pray, pay, and obey, and then we go to God. It's just the opposite, because we have not taken seriously that God is love, and that love is totally for the other, and that love in the other seeks to be, you might say, one with the other, in that fullness of love. And so the whole thing of Christogenesis, you might say, Big Bang is the unfolding, I think, of God consciousness that, you might say, bursts forth in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. There's something of that immediate awareness of God in his life that is radically new, that breaks with the Jewish tradition. And that radical new God consciousness, you might say, is then the revelation of God, in that person's life, in that man Jesus. He is recognized as the Christ by the early church. He doesn't go around saying, I'm the Christ, What they recognize in him is something new, something life-giving, something on the horizon. And therefore, the whole life of Jesus is a power of newness. It's sort of like a new Big Bang, emerges in Jesus. And it's as if, here is the way. So, I speak of it as evolution, you might say, shows up in a person. This is what evolution is. It's that process of an unfolding love, whereby love makes wholes. Jesus is the whole maker. He reconciles. He brings together what is fragmented or apart. And he will do whatever it takes to make more wholes. Whether it means challenging the Jewish law, overturning the temples and the tables in the temple. It's like whatever is opposed to more unity and love, to greater wholes, must be challenged. And so Jesus, you might say, ushers in a new center, a new integral wholeness in his life. I think that's what his life is about, an integral whole. So I call Jesus the whole maker, and if we ask, was Jesus Catholic? My answer is going to be yes, in the broadest sense. Not Catholic with a big C, Catholic in the little c. The word Catholic really means, in its root, in its Greek sense, according to the whole. We sort of translate it into universality, that everyone's supposed to become Catholic. But Catholic, it's a virtue, it's a principle of Catholicity, whole-making. So if we stopped using the word Catholic and we said we're whole-makers, how might that change how we think about ourselves and what we're doing? Now, I do think that life of Jesus in that death and resurrection, first of all, I think the death of Jesus is, you might say, we see in Jesus what the whole Big Bang universe is about. It's love, you might say, exploded into, poured out for the sake of new life and more life. The whole evolution is cruciform. Suffering and death all along the way. Suffering, there's a costliness to life. We didn't get here, it's costly grace and it's costly love all along the way. And that's the same idea. What we see in Jesus is that love poured out for the sake of new life. And resurrection, I think, is a new energy field. I think why the early Christians were so excited about the risen Christ, there was a new energy there. That life is on the horizon. New life, more life, a life that will never end. And that empowered the early church to give their lives, for the sake of the gospel. We have so lost sight of the risen Christ. I won't talk too much longer, but remember Easter, we love Christmas because everyone loves little babies being born, Everyone, you don't have to be a believer. Atheists go Christmas shopping, they all give gifts. Everyone loves Christmas. You come to Easter, it's like, the Lord is risen. Alleluia. Alleluia, alleluia. Really? It's like, wow, this is really, and people say, well, so what's the big deal about you guys, And so we've lost sight, and I think that's our power. It's the power of the belief that in this man Jesus, in his life and death, that he rose to a new life, that life is at the heart of this cosmos. And therefore, it's worth our lives. That's the whole point. We're very self-preserving. We have 5 minutes? Okay. We're very self-preserving about our lives because I don't think we have a sense that there's more life before us. That to give our lives is to become part of a larger whole, a wholeness of life that's God. So evolution is really, Christianity is a religion of evolution. That's what we're saying here. That it is a life of unfolding love. It's a life that's forward movement. What Jesus said is, let the dead bury the dead. You are to follow me. Whoever looks back is not fit for the kingdom of heaven. We're always looking back. So it's time, I think, to let go and to engage. And that's where where contemplation comes in, because it's not about busyness. The engagement is not well, how should we do things? Because we're very pragmatic. So how should we, what new things should we do? The way to go forward is to go inward. It's the inwardness. It's coming to, our world is so distracted by noise and by busyness and clutter. We cannot find that still center within that is that integral wholeness. When we come to the whole within our lives, we then come to be more wholly engaged without. In other words, the more inward we can go, and the more we can find ourselves embraced in love, the more free we are then, you might say, to embrace in love outwardly. And there we become whole makers, reconcilers, people of mercy, people of compassion. And that's why I do think, contemplative outreach has an important role to play in the evolution and in, you might say, emerging Christianity. Because, let's face it, Christianity and all religions are in evolution. We have not named it as such. We have not dealt with it as such, but it is. And what will the Christ be as we go forward? A.R. saw that all religions would converge up ahead. And we are already in a new religious consciousness with world religions. But we have a role to play as Christians in that forward movement of religious convergence. And I think the more we can keep rooted in love in our own lives, the more we can be whole makers of love in the forward movement ahead. So let me just say that here's my definition of a Christian. A Christian is one who is connected through the heart to the whole of life, attuned to the deeper intelligence of nature, and called forth irresistibly by the Spirit to creatively express one's gifts in the evolution of self and world.
Could you say that again?
The Christian is one who is connected through the heart to the whole of life. That to me is what contemplation is about. Attuned to the deeper intelligence of nature, the withinness of nature, called forth irresistibly by Spirit to creatively express one's gifts in the evolution of self and world. As we are open to change, to grow, to unite, so too will be the world around us, because we are part and parcel of a larger whole. So my time is up. May you evolve.